2 men, same age, same income, same bank balance down to the dollar. In 20 years, one of them will own a house worth over $500,000. The other will have a bank account worth almost the same amount, and neither of them will have made a single mistake to get there. This is the story of Ryan and Steve. And by the end of it, you'll understand why the question, should I buy or rent, has almost nothing to do with money and almost everything to do with who you are. Let's rewind 20 years and watch it happen. Ryan and Steve are 32. They live in the same mid-sized American city, work jobs that pay roughly $80,000 a year, and have both spent the better part of a decade quietly not buying things, canceled subscriptions, store-brand cereal that honestly tastes the same, the kind of small, boring discipline nobody claps for. The result, $80,000 each, sitting in a savings account, waiting for a decision. Financially, they are the same person. Personality-wise, they might as well be from different planets. Ryan wants roots, a place that's his, a garage for tools he's fairly confident he'll learn to use eventually, a backyard he can get irrationally protective of before he's even planted anything in it. Steve wants none of that pinned down. He likes not knowing where he'll be in 5 years. The idea of signing up for the same zip code for the next 3 decades makes him faintly uneasy in a way he can't quite explain and doesn't feel like explaining. Same money, opposite instincts, and in a few weeks, those instincts are about to become 2 very different bank statements. Ryan spends 4 months doing what nobody warns you about, house hunting, dozens of listings, more open houses than he'd like to admit to, kitchens he mentally renovated in real time, a basement that smelled faintly of regret. Then he walks into the one, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a modest backyard, and a garage just spacious enough to store exercise equipment. He will statistically never touch again after March. $350,000. He doesn't hesitate. Here's the number that matters first, $70,000. That's Ryan's down payment, a clean 20%. It's the number that unlocks the mortgage, avoids extra insurance, and turns renter into homeowner on paper. But paper isn't free. There are closing costs, lender fees, title fees, inspections, prepaid taxes, and something like 46 documents Ryan signs with the calm confidence of a man who understands maybe 6 of them. Closing costs typically run 2% to 5% of the purchase price. For Ryan, that lands at $10,000. Added up, and before he's moved a single box, Ryan has spent his entire $80,000, $70,000 on the down payment, $10,000 on the paperwork. His savings account now reads 0, and he hasn't even seen the moving truck yet. But the real cost of the house hasn't shown up yet. That comes every month for the next 30 years. Ryan takes out a 30-year fixed mortgage on the remaining $280,000 at 7%. His monthly principal and interest payment, $1,863. That's not the whole bill, though. Add roughly $350 in property taxes, $150 in homeowner's insurance, and another $290 a month Ryan sets aside for maintenance, about 1% of the home's value a year, because roofs and water heaters don't ask permission before failing. Total monthly cost of owning the house, $2,653. Across town, Steve signs a lease on a comparable 3-bedroom for $2,000 a month. No property taxes, no insurance premium. And if the water heater ever stages a rebellion, that's a phone call to the landlord, not a trip to Home Depot. Do the subtraction, and Steve is left with an extra $653 a month that Ryan doesn't have. For about 4 seconds, that $653 looks a lot like a plane ticket to Thailand. Steve doesn't book the flight. Instead, he opens a brokerage account, drops his full $80,000 into a broad stock market index fund, and sets up an automatic transfer for that $653 every single month, starting immediately. Neither of them realizes it yet, but this one decision, made in about 10 minutes at Steve's kitchen table, is going to matter more than almost anything else in this story. Here's where somebody in the comments always says it. Yeah, but Steve's just throwing $2,000 a month away on rent. Ryan's building equity. Technically true. Let's check the receipts. In Ryan's very first month of home ownership, here's where his $2,653 actually goes. $1,633 disappears as pure interest, $350 to property tax, $150 to insurance, $290 to the maintenance fund, That leaves $230 out of $2,653 actually going toward equity. Meanwhile, Steve hands over $2,000 in rent and builds zero equity. That part is true, but calling that throwing money away, while treating mortgage interest, taxes, insurance, and a maintenance fund as some kind of investment, is doing some very creative accounting. Ryan isn't building wealth in month one, he's mostly renting the bank's money. That changes with time, it just changes a lot slower than people think. Moving day. Ryan stands in an empty living room that echoes in a way rented apartments never quite do. And for a second, it actually hits him. This floor, this wall, this slightly crooked doorframe, all of it is his. He paints the living room a color his last 3 landlords never would have allowed. Small thing, feels enormous. 3 years pass. Ryan makes 36 mortgage payments on time, learns which cabinet door sticks in humid weather, and develops a new, slightly paranoid habit, treating every strange noise in the house like a financial emergency. One Saturday, the water heater gives up. Ryan watches a YouTube video titled Easy Water Heater Fix. Anyone can do this. 4 hours, 2 skinned knuckles, and 1 increasingly creative vocabulary later, he calls someone who actually can. A few $100s gone, exactly the kind of expense his maintenance fund exists for. This is home ownership in one scene: pride, competence you didn't know you needed, and a bill you didn't see coming. Let's check the scoreboard. After 36 payments, Ryan's mortgage balance has dropped from $280,000 to about $270,800. Just over $9,000 in principal paid down. Proof the math is finally starting to bend in his favor, even if it doesn't feel dramatic yet. Assume the home appreciates 3 to 4% a year. 3 years in, it's worth somewhere between $382,000 and $394,000. Subtract what he still owes, and Ryan is sitting on $112,000 to $123,000 in home equity. That's real. That's not a hypothetical spreadsheet number. That's wealth he could borrow against, sell into, or eventually pass on. Steve's side of the ledger looks different, but not worse. Over 3 years, he's paid roughly $74,000 in rent, money he'll never see again. But his original $80,000, compounding at a 10% average annual return, has grown to roughly $106,000. Add in 3 years of monthly contributions, starting at $653 and shrinking slightly each year as rent creeps up. And Steve's total portfolio sits at around $130,000. 3 years in, the two paths are almost eerily close. Ryan has equity he can't touch without selling. Steve has a portfolio he could liquidate by Friday. Ryan can paint any wall any color he wants. Steve can move to another city next month with 2 weeks' notice. Neither of them has won anything yet. But the next 17 years are going to test both of them in ways they don't expect. Here's the part of the story most people miss. Ryan's mortgage payment, that $1,863, is frozen. It will be exactly the same number in year 25 as it is in year 1. Inflation doesn't touch it. Rate hikes in the news don't touch it. It's locked. Steve's rent is not locked. It started at $2,000, then $2,060, then roughly $2,122, then a little more the year after that. His landlord, it turns out, is also a firm believer in compound growth, just not the kind that benefits Steve. At 3% annual increases, the $653 monthly edge. Steve started with begins quietly shrinking, not disappearing, shrinking. And that shift, small as it looks month to month, is the whole story of what happens over the next decade. But Steve still has one weapon Ryan doesn't have, and it's the one thing in this whole story that has the power to completely flip the ending. That original $80,000 Steve put into the market on day 1, while Ryan's $80,000 went into a down payment and closing costs, never stopped working. This is opportunity cost, and it's the part of the buy vs rent debate that never makes it onto Instagram infographics. Ryan's money bought him a house that appreciates. Steve's money bought him shares in thousands of companies that, historically, compound faster. Neither of them is wrong. But an honest comparison has to count both. Ryan is 42, he's been promoted twice, has a mortgage payment that feels almost nostalgically small compared to his raises, and a house that's quietly become worth a lot more than he paid for it. At 3 to 4% annual appreciation, his home is now worth somewhere between $470,000 and $518,000. His remaining loan balance has fallen to about $240,000. Subtract the two, and Ryan is sitting on $230,000 to $278,000 in equity. Money he now half-jokingly refers to as the house's problem, not mine. Steve, meanwhile, hasn't broken his rule once. Not during the year the market dropped 20% and every financial channel on his feed was suddenly convinced capitalism was ending. Not during the year his best friend bought a boat. He kept transferring money in on schedule every single month. That original $80,000, 10 years at 10% average annual growth, is now worth roughly $207,000. Add a decade of monthly contributions, smaller near the end than the beginning because his rent has crept toward $2,700 a month, and Steve's total portfolio sits at approximately $290,000. 10 years in, Steve is still ahead in liquid net worth, but his rent has grown by nearly 35%, and it isn't done growing. Ryan, for the first time, starts to feel the shape of an advantage he didn't have in year one, and it's not about equity. It's about certainty. Somewhere around year 12, both of them get a version of the same phone call. An incredible job offer in another state. For Steve, the decision takes about 10 minutes. Give notice, pack, go. No mortgage to untangle, no tenant to find, no house sitting empty while he figures out logistics from 1,000 miles away. For Ryan, it's not that simple. He can sell, which means selling costs, staging, and hoping the market cooperates on his timeline, not the market's. Or he can rent the place out and become a long-distance landlord, which sounds passive right up until the tenant's check bounces and the shortfall comes directly out of his own pocket. He takes the offer. He keeps the house. He becomes, somewhat reluctantly, a landlord in a city he no longer lives in. It works out. But it's the first time in this story that Ryan's biggest asset has also become his biggest source of stress. Ryan and Steve are 52. 2 decades, hundreds of decisions, and one very long compound interest experiment later, here's where they land. Ryan's home, appreciating at 3 to 4% annually for 20 years, is now worth somewhere between $632,000 and $767,000. His mortgage balance has fallen to roughly $160,000, just 10 years left on the loan. That puts his home equity at approximately $472,000 to $607,000. He walks through the house some evenings and genuinely can't remember what the water heater incident even cost him. It's a rounding error now. Steve's portfolio has also had 20 years to compound. His original $80,000 alone at a 10% average annual return has grown to roughly $538,000. Add 2 decades of monthly contributions and their own growth on top of that. And Steve's total portfolio is now worth approximately $750,000. On paper, Steve has come out ahead in raw net worth. But look closer at what each number actually is. Steve's wealth is liquid. He can sell part of it by Friday afternoon if he needs to. Ryan's wealth is real, but it's frozen into drywall and roof shingles. He can't sell 8% of the kitchen no matter how badly he needs cash. And Steve's original $2,000 rent, after 20 years of 3% increases, now sits around $3,600 a month, a bill with no finish line. Ryan has 10 years left on his mortgage. After that, his housing cost drops to taxes, insurance, and maintenance alone. 20 years, and neither man has won. They've just ended up with 2 completely different kinds of rich. Here's the uncomfortable truth underneath all of this. Steve's entire outcome depends on one behavior he had to repeat roughly 240 times without fail. Every month for 20 years when the market was up, invest. When it dropped 30% and every headline screamed that this time was different, invest. When a friend's boat, a tempting vacation, or a slightly nicer car started looking very reasonable, invest anyway. The spreadsheet assumes discipline. Real people don't always have it. For a lot of renters, that extra $653 a month doesn't make it to a brokerage account at all. It quietly becomes a nicer car, a few more vacations, a lifestyle that expands to meet the available cash. And 10 years later, the portfolio that looked so promising on a spreadsheet somehow never existed outside of one. A mortgage doesn't give you that choice every month. The bank has already made the decision for you. That's not romantic, but behaviorally, it's powerful. A mortgage is forced savings whether you feel like saving or not. That's the real hidden variable in this entire story. It was never about interest rates. It was about who actually followed through. Buying has real weaknesses, and pretending otherwise does nobody any favors. Time. If Ryan had sold after year 3, closing costs going in, selling costs coming out, and years of interest-heavy payments could have wiped out most of his equity gain. Buying needs years to work in your favor. It's not a decision that pays off on a short timeline. Mobility. We just watched it happen. A great opportunity in another city is a simple decision for a renter and a logistical negotiation for a homeowner. Concentration risk. Steve owns a slice of thousands of companies across the entire economy. Ryan owns one house, on one street, in one neighborhood, in one city. If that local market booms, Ryan wins big. If the local economy stalls, a factory closes, a major employer leaves town, Ryan can't rebalance his way out of it. He can't sell the upstairs bathroom and buy into a different neighborhood. Liquidity. If Steve suddenly needs $20,000, he sells part of a portfolio, and the cash is in his account within days. If Ryan needs $20,000, his options are refinancing, borrowing against equity, or selling the house outright. Home equity is real wealth. It's just wealth that doesn't move quickly. Here's the least satisfying, most honest answer in personal finance. It depends. Buying tends to win when you're staying put for 7 to 10 years or more. Long enough for transaction costs to be absorbed and for that fixed payment to start looking better every year rent goes up around you. It also wins when home prices are reasonable relative to rent. A useful gut check here is the price-to-rent ratio. Divide the home price by a full year of comparable rent. Ryan's house, $350,000 divided by $24,000 in annual rent, gives a ratio of about 14.6. As that number climbs, especially past 20, renting tends to become the more competitive option. It's a shortcut, not a verdict. Mortgage rates, taxes, and expected investment returns still matter. Renting tends to win when prices are high relative to rent, when flexibility has real value to you, and, critically, when the renter actually invests the difference instead of spending it. And it was never really either or in the first place. Buying a home doesn't mean you stop investing. Plenty of homeowners do both. This was never a competition with one champion. It's a trade-off, and both men made one. Ryan traded liquidity and mobility for stability, leverage, and long-term control over where he lives. Steve traded housing certainty for flexibility and a bigger footprint in the market. Neither trade was automatically smart, neither was automatically foolish. 20 years ago, Ryan and Steve stood in almost identical financial positions and made opposite bets on themselves. The real difference between them was never buy versus rent. It was how long are you actually going to stay, and will you genuinely invest what you save? Buy a house and leave in 3 years, and transaction costs will eat you alive. Rent for 20 years and spend the difference instead of investing it, and the entire advantage evaporates before it ever shows up on a statement. Renters aren't throwing money away. Homeowners aren't automatically winning. Renters pay rent. Homeowners pay interest, taxes, insurance, maintenance, and a roof that occasionally sends a $12,000 invoice with zero warning. Both of them are paying for shelter. They're just paying for it in different currencies. Ryan needed 20 years for buying to prove itself. Steve needed 20 years of not touching the money for renting to prove itself. In the end, the difference between them was never really about the decision they made on day one. It was about what they kept doing, quietly, every single month for the next 240 of them. Subscribe to Chad Explains for more breakdowns of the financial decisions hiding inside everyday life. And tell me in the comments, are you buying, renting, or just waiting for interest rates and home prices to drop at the same time? If it's the third one, I admire the optimism. See you in the next one.